My name is Linda. I'm 29 years old. I was living in Decatur, Georgia, and I've spent most of my life feeling like the invisible daughter in my own family. I've always been the quiet one, the one who tries not to cause trouble, the one who sacrifices for everyone else, sometimes at the cost of my own happiness. Do you ever feel like no matter what you do, it's never enough? That's exactly how I feel every time I look at my parents' faces when they compare me to my sister, Katie. Katie's outgoing, flashy, confident, the golden child. And me? I'm the one who quietly folds the laundry she leaves on the floor, pays for last-minute Christmas decorations, and still somehow gets a tiny nod at best. Growing up, I learned quickly that love in my family came with conditions. Why can't you be more like Katie? My mom would sigh when I tried to explain why I wanted to study art instead of business. My dad, without meaning to, would always tell me, she's just more capable at everything that mattered in their eyes. Not that I didn't try. I gave up summers to help my mom with holiday events, stayed home nights to watch Katie's friends while she went out, but it never seemed to matter. This year, Christmas was supposed to be simple. My parents decided out of the blue that we wouldn't do gifts. We all agreed not to do gifts this year, my dad said with that calm, matter-of-fact tone that somehow makes you feel small, even when nothing is wrong. I accepted it. I nodded, I smiled, because that's what I've always done. I obey. I follow the rules, I don't rock the boat. But then I saw her, Katie, my sister. She didn't care about the no gifts rule. She grinned at our parents, holding a perfectly wrapped, expensive-looking box with a little card on top. I froze, my stomach sank. My voice caught somewhere in my throat, but my eyes didn't lie. They were screaming, "Why her?" And just like that, the room went quiet. My parents glanced at each other, then at me, then back at Katie, and the words that would shatter my Christmas, my illusion of fairness, finally landed. "Oh, don't worry, Linda. We didn't get you anything either. You know, the no gifts rule." I smiled, a polite, broken smile, but inside, everything twisted, because I knew this wasn't just about the gifts. This was about everything I had been quietly enduring my whole life. The favoritism, the comparisons, the constant reminder that I was less. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck. And that's when I noticed the glint in Katie's eyes. That little smug smirk that said, she's going to be embarrassed, just like always. At that exact moment, I realized this Christmas wasn't just a quiet holiday. It was the beginning of something I hadn't planned for. Something that would change everything I thought I knew about my family and myself. And then Katie did the unthinkable. She handed the gift to my mom, laughed softly, and said, "I hope this makes up for Linda's gift, since she obviously won't be getting one." I froze. The room felt colder. My parents laughed lightly, the kind of laugh that makes you feel like your feelings are a nuisance. My chest tightened. My hands shook. I couldn't breathe. And right then, I realized I had a choice to make. I could sit there, take the humiliation, and smile like I always did. Or I could finally let them see that I wasn't invisible anymore. But I didn't do anything. Yet. The house felt impossibly loud, even though the chatter was normal. I sat there, hands folded in my lap, staring at the floor. Everyone else was smiling, talking, laughing. But I felt like I was underwater, muffled and disconnected from the world I had known my entire life. I thought about every Christmas, every birthday, every accomplishment I had quietly celebrated alone, while Katie's triumphs were broadcast like announcements at a school assembly. And here it was again, a small, perfectly wrapped box had become the symbol of a lifetime of favoritism. Why did I even care about their approval anymore? That question hit me harder than I expected, because the truth was I did care, too much. And that had cost me years of peace, confidence, and sometimes even relationships. I had spent so long molding myself into what they wanted, what they called capable and responsible, that I forgot what it felt like to put myself first. I excused myself quietly, walking out to the small patio in the back. The December air in Decatur was crisp, almost sharp, and I let it bite at my cheeks as I tried to breathe. I leaned against the railing and closed my eyes. I thought about my parents, about their favorite phrases. "You'll understand when you're older," or "we're just trying to help you." Those words had always sounded caring. But now I realized they were excuses for ignoring the very real hurt they caused. I thought about Katie, my sister, always charming, always radiant, always protected by our parents' smiles. I hated her for a moment, a fleeting, raw anger. but I also pitied her. She had grown up needing their approval so much that she didn't even see the walls they built around themselves, or the ones they built around me. I stayed out there for a long time, letting the cold settle into my bones. And then I made a decision. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want to cry. I didn't want to beg. I wanted distance. Not forever, not yet, but enough to finally reclaim a little part of myself. When I walked back inside, the laughter and small talk didn't reach me. I smiled politely when someone glanced at me, but the emptiness they assumed I felt was gone. It was replaced by something I hadn't felt in a long time: clarity. That night I went home alone. I didn't call my parents to complain. I didn't text Katie to explain. I just sat quietly in my apartment, the glow of my laptop reflecting off the walls, and I started to write. I wrote about everything I had never said out loud: the comparisons, the sacrifices, the silent humiliation. I wrote about everything I had never said out loud: the comparisons, the sacrifices, the silent humiliation. I wrote about the gifts I had given that no one had noticed, the achievements I had quietly celebrated, and the ways I had tried and failed to be enough for people who would never truly see me. And as I typed, I realized something profound. My life didn't have to revolve around their validation anymore. I could live without their constant judgment, without their conditional love. I could finally start setting boundaries, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. It wasn't easy. I cried that night, not out of weakness, but out of release. Years of quiet suffering poured out in tears. And when I finally wiped my eyes, I felt lighter. I felt free. The next morning, I made small changes. I started saying no when it felt uncomfortable. I stopped offering extra favors that would never be acknowledged. I started pursuing projects and friendships that were meaningful to me, not because they would look good to my parents. And then came the first sign that maybe, just maybe, the quiet shift I had begun was already affecting my family dynamics. A text from my mom appeared on my phone. "Linda, are you coming to the brunch with Katie tomorrow?" I stared at it, and for the first time in years, I felt a little thrill, not anxiety, not guilt, not the need to justify myself. I realized I had a choice. I could participate on their terms, or I could participate on mine. And that's when I knew something had changed. Because this Christmas, for the first time, I wasn't waiting for anyone to validate me. I wasn't hiding. I was beginning to take control of my life and my story. But I also knew that taking control wouldn't be smooth. Katie wouldn't let this go easily. My parents wouldn't understand. And the next family gathering, the next dinner, would test me in ways I hadn't faced before. And that's exactly what happened the very next morning. The morning sunlight in Decatur was unusually bright, almost cheerful, and it made the thought of facing my family feel heavier than usual. I took a deep breath and reminded myself I wasn't going there to beg for approval. I wasn't going to compete with Katie or shrink to make anyone comfortable. I was going there as me, Linda, for the first time in a long time. When I arrived at the little cafe my mom had chosen, the smell of coffee and pastries filled the air. My parents waved me over like nothing had happened. My sister Katie smiled, that familiar, calculated smile, the one that used to make me feel like I was stepping into someone else's spotlight. "Linda, you made it," Mom chirped, her tone bright but somehow too polished, like she was performing happiness. I smiled calmly and slid into the booth. I noticed immediately how Katie leaned back, casually flicking her hair, making sure her presence was impossible to ignore. She didn't say anything at first, but the way she glanced at the menu, the way she casually mentioned the expensive gift she had bought herself, it was all deliberate. I felt the old instinct rise, the urge to apologize, to explain, to make things right. But I stopped myself. I reminded myself of the night I spent writing, of the small freedom I felt in taking control of my life. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. "Did you see the new art exhibit downtown?" I asked suddenly, steering the conversation toward something I cared about. My voice was calm, steady. Katie raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I don't really have time for art, you know. Me, always busy with more important things." I felt a flicker of irritation, but instead of responding defensively, I just smiled. "I went yesterday. It was incredible. You'd appreciate it if you came." She laughed softly, a little condescending, but I didn't bite. I realized that my anger wasn't going to make her stop. My reaction, or lack thereof, was what mattered. Throughout brunch, I started noticing the patterns. Every slight, every passive comment, every friendly jab my parents and Katie threw, It was all the same script I had been living my whole life, but this time I didn't react with shame. I observed, I absorbed, I stayed calm. I chose my responses carefully. And then came the moment that would mark the first real test of my boundaries. Katie reached across the table and, with a mock sympathy, said, "I know it must be hard, not getting a gift this year. I tried to make sure Mom didn't forget about me, unlike someone else." A cold knot formed in my stomach. In the past, I would have laughed nervously, apologized, tried to smooth it over. But this time, I didn't flinch. I looked her directly in the eye and said calmly, almost quietly, "That's fine, Katie. I'm actually happy with the way things are. Gifts aren't everything." The words felt strange on my tongue, firm, measured, and yet free. She blinked at me, caught off guard. For a moment, the smugness in her eyes faltered. She tried to recover, but the energy had shifted. Even my parents looked surprised. They weren't used to me speaking without hesitation, without self-doubt. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was my first real step in showing that I wasn't invisible anymore. The rest of brunch passed in a strange mixture of normal conversation and subtle tension. I focused on myself, on what I wanted to say, on the boundaries I was quietly drawing around my life. By the time I left, I felt lighter, but I also knew the real challenges were ahead. Katie wouldn't give up easily. My parents wouldn't change overnight. And deep down, I knew that the next family event, the real test of my patience and resolve, was coming sooner than I wanted. Because sometimes setting boundaries doesn't just upset one person, it shakes the foundation of everyone around you. After that brunch, I didn't call my parents for a few days. I didn't text Katie. I didn't make excuses. I just lived. And for the first time in years, I focused on me. I signed up for an art workshop downtown, something I had always wanted to do but postponed because of family obligations. I started volunteering at a small community gallery, meeting people who valued my creativity, not because it made me look capable in someone else's eyes, but because it was genuinely good work. Every brushstroke, every conversation, every small project reminded me of who I was outside, the roles I had been forced to play. It felt strange at first, like I was learning to walk again after years of tiptoeing, but I loved it. And then, almost without realizing it, I started noticing subtle changes at home. Mom called me one evening asking about my art class. She didn't mention Katie, she didn't compare. She just asked, and I felt calm. I told her about the workshop, the artists I had met, the pieces I had started. And for the first time, I realized something important. I could share parts of my life without needing validation. I could exist without shrinking. Katie, of course, noticed too. At family gatherings, her usual smugness faltered when I spoke confidently about my art or my work projects. She tried to interject, to outshine me, but I stayed calm. I didn't compete. I didn't explain myself. I simply existed with dignity. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the dynamics began to shift. My parents started including me in decisions, small things at first, like which restaurant to try or whose schedule to accommodate. They weren't perfect, and I wasn't expecting perfection, but they were noticing. It was subtle, quiet, and yet it felt like a small personal victory. One evening, I received a text from my dad. "Linda, your art show is coming up soon. Mom and I would like to come." I stared at it. Part of me wanted to say nothing. After all, I had already been living for myself. But another part of me realized that this was a natural consequence of my choices. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't demanded respect. I hadn't tried to punish anyone. I had simply set boundaries, pursued my own path, and lived authentically. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, Katie had been the one everyone admired, the one praised, the one at the center of attention. And now, her constant spotlight had dulled a little, not because I had sought revenge, but because I had stepped out of the shadow she assumed I'd always occupy. And the best part? I felt no glee, no triumph, only calm, quiet satisfaction. This was not about winning. This was about reclaiming my life. But of course, life isn't all neat lessons and easy victories, because as I embraced this new version of myself, Katie began to push back. Small comments, subtle digs, attempts to draw me into arguments I refused to fight. And that's when I realized karma doesn't need to be violent or cruel. It's patient. It's quiet. It's simply letting life unfold while you refuse to play by someone else's rules. The next family dinner was coming, and I knew it would be the real test of everything I had started building: my boundaries, my confidence, my sense. The next family dinner was at our parents' house, a quiet Sunday evening in Decatur. but I felt a weight in my chest I hadn't felt in months. Not fear exactly, but anticipation. I knew Katie would test me. I knew my parents might unknowingly side with her, but I also knew something had shifted inside me. When I arrived, everything seemed normal at first. The table was set, the food smelled like Mom's usual comfort dishes, and Katie was, predictably, the center of attention from the moment I walked in. She smiled at me, but it wasn't warm. It was calculated. "Linda, you made it," Mom said brightly, but I could hear the underlying tension, the subtle surprise that I had actually shown up, without hesitating or apologizing for existing. Katie leaned back in her chair, smirking slightly. "I guess even you can manage to get here on time." I took a deep breath. I didn't respond with sarcasm. I didn't defend myself. I simply smiled calmly and said, "Yes, I thought I'd join you all tonight." That small moment, the quiet, deliberate choice to remain composed, felt revolutionary. The room shifted subtly. Katie's smirk faltered. My parents glanced at each other, confused by my calm demeanor. They were used to me shrinking or apologizing, and now I wasn't. The conversation continued. Katie made little digs, remarks about my art projects being hobbyish, jokes about my quiet nature, and casual reminders of how she had been more successful in life. But I stayed composed. I didn't engage. I didn't justify myself. I simply observed. And here's the thing, the more I stayed calm, the more the tension turned inward on them. Katie's jabs started sounding petty and thin. My parents, who had always smiled indulgently at her antics, now seemed slightly uncomfortable. For the first time, they were noticing me, not as someone to compare to Katie, but as my own person. At one point, Katie tried to escalate. She picked up a story about our childhood, twisting it to make me look foolish in front of our parents. She expected the usual reaction: embarrassment, silence, maybe a defensive comment. I took a sip of my water, met her gaze, and said softly but firmly, "That's one way to remember it. I see it differently, and that's okay." Silence. Not awkward silence, but a pause pregnant with realization. Katie blinked. My parents didn't know how to react, and for the first time, I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in years: control. The rest of dinner continued, quieter than usual. I focused on the food, on small talk I actually enjoyed, on the simple act of being present without seeking validation. And as I left that night, I realized the first real cracks were forming. Katie's smile was no longer untouchable. My parents were no longer completely in her corner, and most importantly, I was no longer the invisible one. I went home that night, feeling a mix of exhaustion and quiet triumph. This wasn't dramatic revenge. There were no shouting matches, no confrontations, no public humiliation. But it was slow, satisfying justice, the kind that grows naturally when you stop playing by someone else's rules and start living on your own terms. And deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. My journey of self-respect and quiet empowerment was far from over, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid. The weeks after that family dinner felt lighter. I started waking up earlier, giving myself quiet mornings with coffee and music, time I had never allowed myself when my life revolved around others' expectations. I painted, I wrote, I met new friends who genuinely cared about me, not for what I did for them, but for who I was. At work, I started speaking up more, sharing ideas I had held back for years. The recognition I received wasn't dramatic, but it was meaningful. Colleagues noticed my confidence, my voice, my presence. For the first time, I felt visible in a positive way, without trying to please anyone else. Meanwhile, back home, I started noticing subtle shifts in my family. Katie, predictably, tried harder to be the center of attention, but her usual tactics, jabs, comparisons, subtle boasts, started losing their impact. I didn't rise to her bait. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. And slowly, the people around her, even my parents, began seeing the cracks in her confidence. One evening, I got a text from my mom. "Linda, we missed you at dinner tonight. Everyone noticed you weren't there." I paused before replying. For years, my absence might have caused guilt, shame, or a flurry of explanations. This time, I simply texted back, "I was busy with a project I'm really excited about. Hope dinner went well." Simple, honest, calm. Later, I heard from a mutual family friend that Katie had been complaining about me suddenly acting so independent and ignoring the family. And I felt a strange mix of amusement and calm. This was exactly the effect I had hoped. For not revenge in the traditional sense, but a natural consequence of my choices. I didn't need to prove myself or call anyone out. I just existed authentically, and life had a way of balancing itself. At home, my parents started asking about my art, my projects, my friends. They were learning slowly that Linda wasn't invisible, that I had a life outside their approval, and I was thriving. And for me, this wasn't about making them feel guilty. It was about recognizing that their favoritism had limits. Their choices couldn't define my worth anymore. The shift was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was real. And the best part? I felt no anger toward Katie, no need to win. I simply stood in my own strength. That quiet, deliberate boundary setting, the choice to step back, to live my own life, to refuse validation I didn't earn or deserve, was the beginning of my true freedom. I realized then that slow, patient justice wasn't about shouting or dramatic confrontation. It was about letting life unfold naturally while staying firm in your self-respect. And that's when I felt it, the real power of choosing myself first. It was another family gathering, this time a small dinner at our parents' house. The holiday decorations were still up. The house smelled faintly of pine and baked cinnamon, and for the first time I felt a quiet confidence walking through the door. Katie, of course, noticed immediately. She tried her usual smile, the one that had always made me feel small. But this time, I didn't shrink. I didn't avert my eyes. I met her gaze calmly, with the faintest smile that said, "I am here. I am present. I am me." Mom started in with the small talk, asking about work, about my art projects, about friends I had made. I answered openly, without apology, without over-explaining. And I noticed my parents listening, really listening, for the first time in years. Katie, not used to losing control, tried to interject. "Well, you know, Linda's art is interesting, but maybe not as practical as..." I held up my hand gently, not angrily, not with sarcasm, simply, "Katie, that's your opinion. I respect it, but I'd appreciate it if you didn't make comparisons. I'm proud of my work, and it's enough for me." Silence. My parents blinked, slightly surprised. Katie's smugness faltered, and for the first time the dynamic shifted clearly. I had set a boundary, calmly, and it was being respected. No yelling, no confrontation, just clarity, calm, and self-respect. The rest of dinner passed with quiet, polite conversation. Katie made a few more small comments, but they no longer had weight. I didn't rise to them. I didn't argue. I simply existed in my own confidence, letting her actions reflect on her, not on me. Later, when I drove home, I thought about the years I had spent shrinking, apologizing, trying to fit into roles that weren't mine. And I realized something profound. The quietest victories are often the most powerful. I didn't need to shame anyone. I didn't need revenge in the dramatic sense. Life had a way of balancing itself. My family's favoritism, their assumptions, their comparisons, they had all lost their power over me the moment I chose myself. And as I sat in my apartment that night, I felt a calm certainty I had never known before. I was free, not from my family entirely, but from the weight of needing their approval. I thought about all the people who struggle quietly, who give and sacrifice, who feel unseen in their own homes. And I wanted to ask them gently, how long will you let someone else define your worth? Because for me, the answer had finally become clear. Worth is not given, it is chosen. And once you choose it for yourself, nothing, not comparisons, not favoritism, not manipulation, can take it away. Months passed after that last family dinner, and I kept living my life on my own terms. I continued to pursue my art, my friendships, and my own happiness without waiting for anyone's approval. Katie's attempts to provoke or undermine me became smaller and fewer. My parents slowly began to treat me with a quiet respect they hadn't shown before, not because I demanded it, but because I consistently refused to let their favoritism control me. The irony was subtle, yet undeniable. The more I cared for myself, the more they noticed me. I realized that life doesn't always hand out dramatic revenge or cinematic justice. Sometimes it's quiet, subtle. The kind of justice that comes from simply choosing yourself first, letting go of the need for recognition, refusing to be small for someone else's comfort, and calmly asserting your boundaries. Those choices ripple outward in ways that are far more powerful than shouting or confrontation ever could be. I still see my family, but I've learned to navigate my relationships differently. I participate when I want to, I withdraw when I need to, and I never apologize for protecting my own sense of self-worth. I've built a life that is fuller, freer, and more authentic than I ever imagined possible. And the lesson I carry with me and share now is simple. Your value isn't defined by the people who fail to see it. Your worth isn't measured by comparisons, favoritism, or others' opinions. You define it, you protect it, you choose it. I've discovered that family isn't always blood. Family can also be the people who see you, who respect your boundaries, and who celebrate your existence without needing to compare you to anyone else. As I sit here, reflecting on everything that happened, I ask you, my listener, this question. Are you living your life for yourself? Or are you still shrinking to make others comfortable? Because the truth is, freedom, confidence, and real peace come not from trying to earn love or approval, but from choosing yourself first, quietly, patiently, and without apology. As I sit here reflecting on everything, the years of feeling invisible, the comparisons, the quiet sacrifices, the moments I thought no one saw me, I realized something important. Life isn't about proving yourself to anyone else. It's about honoring yourself, even when the world doesn't notice. I learned that self-worth isn't given. It isn't handed to you with a gift or a compliment or a smile. It's something you choose quietly, patiently, and over again. It's saying no when it's needed. It's protecting your peace when people try to take it. It's walking into a room with confidence, even if they try to make you feel small. I learned that family doesn't always look like the people you share a last name with. Sometimes family is the people who see you, who respect you, who celebrate you without needing to compare or compete. Sometimes family is yourself, the you who refuses to shrink, who refuses to apologize for existing, and who chooses dignity over drama. And here's the truth, you don't need to fight to prove a point. You don't need revenge or to humiliate anyone. Justice doesn't always come with noise or chaos. Sometimes it comes quietly, naturally, through living your life fully, authentically, and fearlessly. And when that happens, the